Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inner Join. This is a show where we deep dive into the world of data governance and data management. I'm your host, Shinji Kim. I'm the founder CEO of SelectStar. SelectStar is a data discovery and governance platform with an automated data catalog, lineage, documentation, and now semantic model, semantic layer generation. Today, I'm really excited to have Jess Kyle, who's a data architecture manager, to discuss driving ROI with data culture. So please comment on the chat if you have any questions for us during the show. And Jess, welcome to Inner Join.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to have you here. Would love to maybe get started with our core question, which is tell us a little bit about you and how you got into data.
Yeah, great. So I'm a data professional. I've been doing this for about 13 and a half years now. I kind of stumbled into a data career, which, given the conversations I've had with other data folks, it seems like that's pretty common. People start out in one field and they kind of end up in data because something about data draws them to it, whether it's they love asking questions and looking at data for insights, or maybe they like the technical aspects of writing SQL queries or whatever it is. People kind of fall into it. And that's the same for me. I actually started out as a revenue accountant in oil and gas. So much different. But I got my first data job at a sales distributor for industrial tools, and I just fell in love with it and kind of built my skill set from there. And the more I've done with data, the more I've wanted to do. And I love helping people solve problems. And so what I've learned over the last 13 years is that the technical aspects, the data itself, and the things you do to procure the data and get it into a format you can use, that's only one side of it. There's this whole human element, this whole world of building trust and relationships. And that, I think, is really, really what has ignited my passion, is when you can do that and learn how to work with lots of different people and inspire and motivate and ask the right questions and be curious and accountable. That's really going to elevate the level and impact of insight that you can unlock with the data. And so that's kind of where my focus is now, is helping the human beings who are involved and impacted by the data to do it better and in a way that feels better and makes everyone more happy.
Amazing. I think data as someone who's walking into that, there is a lot of skill sets that you may need to acquire and different ways of thinking. At the same time, data is something that really is shared across many different departments. It's how businesses and everyone makes decision today. So the communication side, and also for the data team to be not just high performance, but high trust team is so important. We'd love to dive into this and learn a little bit more. Would love to kind of like understand what are some of the ways that today's data leaders can do to naturally encourage their leaders, their team members to speak up and also communicate more so that everyone is on the same page and the impact can be really driven.
Yeah. So first of all, I love that this is the first question, because I personally think this is, it starts with leadership, right? It starts with the tone at the top. I think the most important thing is consistency as a leader. So by that, I mean, obviously we can tell our teams, I want you to speak up. I want you to tell me when something's not working. I want to know how you're feeling about the work. And like, we can ask for feedback all day long. But if we don't do something with that feedback, then we may as well not even ask for it. So, our teams as leaders, the people working with us are looking at everything we do. They are scrutinizing every action we take. So if we are in a team meeting and we say something like, I'm getting the sense that there's a lot of stress and anxiety right now. I just want to understand a little more about that. Would anyone be willing to share what you think the problem is? If if someone shares and then they see you either make a face like, like I didn't like hearing that, or they hear you deflect or defend or make excuses for why that thing might be a problem, or even let's say you respond correctly in the moment, but then after the conversation, you don't do anything about it. they're paying attention to that. Your teams are paying attention to that. Your actions are going to speak louder than your words. And so the next time you ask for feedback, your team's thinking, well, like, I'm not going to speak up. Why would I make myself a target if you're not even going to do anything with the information anyway? So that is where the trust starts. It's not just the fact that you're soliciting feedback, although you should often solicit feedback. It's also, what are you doing with that feedback? That's part one. Part two is, what are you as a leader doing to model the behavior you want to see? Are you saying the hard things in conversations with other leaders? Are you managing stakeholders who either, refuse to follow a process, or are disrespectful to your team, or undermine, the results of whatever data study you're doing? Again, you have to model the behavior that you want to see. So trust is built. I love Brene Brown. She talks about trust like the stacking of small moments over time, like marbles in a jar. And every action we take and every word we say is either putting more marbles into that jar or taking marbles out. And that has real impact. So I think from a behavioral perspective, ask for the feedback, respond to it appropriately, validate feelings. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they're saying, but listen with curiosity. Thank them for sharing. Never penalize someone for telling you a hard truth, or you're going to scare everyone from ever speaking again. So yeah, I would say consistency, to boil it down into one word.
Okay, so it sounds like there is a lot to do with being an empathetic leader to the team, which can be applicable for any leaders in an organization, and also actually implementing or following up or taking an action based on the feedback. I'm guessing what it would actually look like to build that type of trust in the data team. Are there any rituals or habits that you've seen, like some practices that you've seen that actually moves the needle?
Yeah, I think having established rituals is great. So having a retro is great as long as, it has a purpose. A retro is pointless if everyone who's attending the retro feels like they have to paint a rosy picture of how things went. A retro really only is helpful if teams can be really candid about, here's some stuff that really blew up this week and here's how it went wrong, and be given the opportunity to submit any ideas for how they can prevent that in the future. So, rituals are great. Retros. Stand-ups, I love stand-ups. I mean, I've heard mixed feedback about daily stand-ups. I personally like it. I've worked primarily in remote first companies the last few years. And to me, it's really important to have that regular connection with the people on your team. Even if maybe you don't do it every day, maybe you do it 3 times a week. Or maybe you do a team sync once a week that's a little bit longer, where, we want everyone to be communicating, getting to know each other, building trust. Another thing I've done on my teams is like a monthly, like every 4 weeks, like a social happy hour. We'll set aside an hour at the end of the day and everyone hops on, and it's not mandatory, but it's encouraged, where we just talk about things that are not work. So building trust. You mentioned empathy, which is a huge component of trust. And I like to talk about empathy from the standpoint of productive empathy, right? So I think a lot of people get scared off when we talk about empathy, because they imagine, well, if I empathize, if I'm empathetic, that means that I'm acting like someone's therapist. That means that I have to take on all their personal problems. And that is not what that means at all. Empathy just means sitting with someone in what they're telling you and understanding as a human being what it would feel like to go through that, right? It doesn't mean that you're trying to solve their problems. In fact, if you jump into solving all their problems, that's not empathy. That's something totally different. Empathy would be, Shinji, let's say you tell me something really hard that you're going through, and I sit and listen, and then I say, God, that sounds so hard, right? Like, it's simple. It's little moments like that build the trust and let you know, I'm listening, I'm here with you in this. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of rituals and behaviors. And if you have to choose one or the other, if your meeting calendar is already full, or you don't want to add any more meetings or whatever, or for whatever reason, I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to have team rituals, but let's say that's the case, behaviors are definitely more important. It's the day-to-day how we're interacting with each other, how we speak to each other, the words we use, and how we handle mistakes, how we handle our own mistakes and the mistakes of people on our teams. So accountability, I mean, yeah, I could go on forever about this question. There's so many things that go into building trust and empathy.
Yeah, I guess maybe the good way to dive into this is if you want to give us some examples of how this type of at a point of time when
Mhm.
you have seen examples of a technically strong team but
Mhm.
was underperforming because the environment wasn't necessarily right. And if you can give us an example of not necessarily the most senior team but
Sure.
have done well because of the right culture and environment that
Yep.
they were operating under a certain type of leadership.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen it go both ways. So for the first example, here's the thing about data professionals. Most people who are working with data, they're not just doing it just to go through the motions. Like people in this line of work, a lot of times are very passionate about what they do. They love solving problems. They're invested in it personally, and they have the technical skills to back it up. And it's really sad when they end up in an environment that puts out that flame, right? Feeling burned out, feeling like it doesn't matter what you do. Maybe your team is super overwhelmed and no one will follow a process and you just feel like, you know, like an order taker, right? Like nothing you do matters and you can't have impact. I have seen that happen. The
Yeah, and
situation.
I guess the nature of data work also kind of can come in an ad hoc request fashion.
Yes, definitely. And there's a very, I think anyone listening who works in data knows there's a very big tension between managing those ad hoc requests and then doing kind of the bigger projects, like deeper, more high impact analyses. I like to use the metaphor of a data restaurant. So I've waited tables, I've worked in restaurants, I've worked in data. My observation is that there are a lot of parallels. So think about it. Your stakeholder is the customer, you're the server. Your stakeholder says, I want this, this, and this. I already know how it needs to look. I already know how it needs to come out, right? Like that's a very typical ad hoc request. There's not a lot of deep analysis going on there. They're giving you an order, you go back to the kitchen, cook it up, and then you serve it. Here's your data, right? The problem with that model, and we have to have it to an extent, right? Not all the data that people need to do their jobs is a deep dive analysis, right? Like people need customer lists and a data set of, transactions that happened last April and stuff like that. I think the best thing you can do to support, ad hoc requests is have a really strong self-service platform and train your stakeholders on how to use it. Like there should be regular trainings, and any stakeholder who needs data should be expected to attend to those trainings and learn how to use the tools, right? If you want to have a data-driven culture and you want to drive data literacy across the org, you have to invest in the tools and training to empower people. You can't just say, we're data-driven because we have a data team. Like that's not enough. So in an environment where that kind of thing is not being managed appropriately and you're getting just this, ambush of ad hoc requests constantly, over time, that's going to chip away at your passion for what you do. That is going, you don't feel like you're having any big impact if all you're doing is producing customer lists and data sets all day. Like, you might be really talented and good at what you do, and no one's even going to know that because all you're doing is ad hoc requests. So, it's really important to have those self-serve tools to empower that. I have also seen it go the other way where a data team, there was one company I worked at where the team was trusted to be the experts in the data, right? And so if a stakeholder needed data from the team, they couldn't just say, I need this, this, and this. They would have to say to the team, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. Do you know of anything we can pull from the data that might help me get an answer to this question? I mean, if you come to a data professional with that kind of, opening, that like their eyes are going to light up because they're like, ooh, a problem that I get to help solve. And, they get to be curious and ask more questions and dive in. And it becomes a partnership between you and the stakeholders. The best performing data teams are thought of by the organization as partners, not as a cost center or a service, right? Like they're not a service desk. They're partners in problem solving.
Yeah, for sure. I think in like some of the things that I was thinking about is that a lot of these requests around data, or even to an extent to answer a question, is also something that more tooling and AI is going to help for business stakeholders.
Mhm.
So, in terms of data teams, in order for them to perform and have a um, like higher level management of how others are also leveraging data, because introducing a tool, sure, there is the training aspect of it, but what are some of the other areas that you see that data teams as they ramp up really end up taking care of if they get more freed up, if they're all more freed up from the ad hoc requests?
Yeah, I mean, the strongest, can't find the word I'm looking for, but to me, one of the most important reasons that you should free your team up from ad hoc requests is because when they have time to proactively go out and dig through the data, a lot of times they're going to bring stuff to your attention that you didn't even know that you needed to be paying attention to. So, in order for teams to be able to do this, aside from the ad hoc requests, teams must have a very thorough understanding of the business. What do we do? Who are our customers? What's important to us? What's on the roadmap for the next 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, right? The business leadership, not just data leadership, but leadership at the company must include data teams in the discussions about what is important to them. Because when you do that, your data team is going to be like, oh, wow, okay, like this is the direction we're headed. I have all kinds of ideas. This reminds me of something I saw in a data set I was looking at last week. I'm going to go dig further into that. I'm going to ask more questions. When you're able to do this, what you're going to find is that your data team is going to come to you. Hey, CEO, I was looking through the data and I was kind of just crunching some numbers because I had a hunch about something. And I actually stumbled onto this other thing that I think we need to be paying attention to, right? If you can get your team to that point and have that kind of partnership with your team, I mean, really, there's no limit to the impact that data can have. And by the way, AI tools are great. I know that's the direction we're headed, more and more AI, and I don't have a problem with that. But AI is not a substitution for a human partnership built on trust, curiosity, and really caring about the business objectives and understanding what it takes to get there.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I mean, it sounds like a very idealistic environment if there's like a data team that will actually just monitor and then bring out things that they think, is a new thing and different part. I think one of the challenges getting there is also because data there may be a lot of desire and the spark moments from the data teams as they learn more about the business. From the business side, they are actually really busy also executing on their line of work, and I'm sure they've done their own, their best to translate the context and knowledge and their objectives, maybe have like different documentation and all. What are the things that you feel like was necessary or was like the best practices to ensure that the business team doesn't necessarily feel like they're losing a lot of time to trying to train someone and give all the context when because like the data team may not be really the subject matter expert in here, and then also for the data team to have a better understanding to serve the business lines more natively.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to kind of go on a little tangent here, but I promise it's leading to a point. So this kind of gets at the question of data team structures. And, there's all kinds of opinions about, should it be centralized? Should it be decentralized? Hub and spoke, some kind of hybrid of everything. If you want to be able to have the people doing the execution in the business focusing on what they're doing and not have to spend a bunch of time ramping up data teams on what they're supposed to know, you really do need a good mix of folks who are embedded in different parts of the org and folks who are more central and can answer more general questions or help tie different things together, right? So if you have people who are, okay, take like a product team, for example. If you have a few data folks who are embedded in the product team, they're attending all the product meetings. They're attending all the presentations and lunch and learns. They're in those discussions. They're in the rooms where these things are happening. They're part of the team. So when you do that, you don't really have to spend a lot of extra time explaining to someone like what's going on, because they're already in those rooms. They already know what's happening. Whereas if your team is totally centralized and everyone's responsible for knowing everything, then yeah, you're going to have to do a lot more legwork to get someone caught up or give someone the context for why they're asking that question in the first place. So I very, very strongly advocate for someone from the data team being involved in all these meetings. Like any meeting where you're discussing an important project, an important question, a potential strategy, like you should have someone from the data team in there. And by the way, maybe it's like you instinctively would think, oh, we'll get the director, we'll get, the most senior leader on the team. Okay, like sure, include them, but include someone on the team who has hands on keyboard, who knows the data, who can translate what they're hearing into like, here's how we need to go about getting these questions answered. The director of the team obviously needs to be in the know and know what's going on, but most of the time they're not in the weeds enough to really be able to translate what they're hearing in a meeting into, okay, here's the specific actions that we need to take. So I think having the right structure is critical here. And it requires a lot of thought, and it also requires being willing to change things if what you're trying doesn't work, iterating, try this out. Okay, this isn't really working that great. We're going to restructure. We're going to do this. I have found that as long as you're transparent and open and communicative with your team about why we're changing things, what's not working, they feel like part of the process and they're not going to throw a fit. But if they're not part of the process and they don't understand the why behind something, and all you're doing is being like, well, now we're going to reorganize. Well, now it's 2 months later, we're going to reorganize again. And they don't understand, that can produce a lot of feelings of anxiety. Ultimately, again, and you're going to hear me be a broken record throughout our talk, it's about trust. It is always about trust in relationships. If you have a foundation of trust and you have a good relationship with your leaders, your stakeholders, other contributors on the team, you can get through anything together. And all you have to do is have conversations about it and listen to each other until you get to a solution that works for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is really the baseline of performance for any organization or teams. So I think it's important, and in a way, also it highlights the importance more because the data like already gives you some understanding of like what it is exactly that you're referring to or another person is referring to. It can help back your assumptions and discussions. It can be more fruitful with data. So I think there's a lot of element of like why trust is more highlighted in data teams for sure. So yeah, we talked about how like a lot of data teams may struggle being perceived as service desks, and I wonder, kind of if someone is trying to shift that type of perception, and but at the same time, you are hired to help the operation, help the business run. Uh, it's a boundary, but also it is a balance that data team needs to set. How do you help your data teams? Have you helped your data teams to manage that tension between being helpful for the businesses, but also not getting overrun by just requests?
Yeah, I think this is consistently one of the hardest problems that data teams have to solve. So one thing that I really like is having maybe a more junior role on the team that is responsible for fielding ad hoc requests, right? It's a great role because first of all, someone is getting exposure to all the different pieces of the data in the business. They're the front lines for ad hoc requests that come in. They're finding out more, asking kind of those initial questions, the intake person, right? They're triaging. And 9 times out of 10, they can, if it's a true ad hoc request, that's not a deep analysis, they can kind of knock that out. They can go grab the data set, deliver it, whatever the customer list, whatever it is that the stakeholders needing. This has so many benefits. They're forming relationships with stakeholders. They're getting to know people throughout the business. They're getting to know different issues throughout the business. They're building relationships and getting to a point where they can say, oh, this is interesting. Like what's going on? Why do you need this? Kind of just conversationally. So they're learning more about stakeholder needs. And they're freeing up, the more senior members of the team to really be working on high impact analyses. So I like that as one option. But I'm going to echo something I said at the very beginning. Leadership is the most important element here. So let's say that your team has been operating in ad hoc mode and you're like, okay, something's got to give. This is not sustainable. I don't even know where to begin, right? First thing is that senior leadership on the data team and senior leadership in the company need to be in sync and need to be on the same page about what needs to happen. There needs to be a plan. Like, okay, I want our team to be able to partner more tightly with the business because I think we can do a lot better of a job solving problems. Here's the kind of support I need from you to make this work, right? The reason you want to do this is because leaders in the company are responsible for setting expectations for how we behave and interact with each other, right? You can have all the processes in the world. And I love that you used the word boundary earlier, because think about it, like a process is a boundary. It's a boundary saying, here's how we expect you to interact with us. You can have all the intake processes in the world, but if your stakeholders are ignoring the process and just bulldozing through and DMing all your team members, that process is just a piece of paper with writing on it. It takes backing and support by leadership. And like, preach this from the mountaintop like every time I'm asked, because it is an often overlooked. Like, what we tend to do is put the onus on our teams to stand up to stakeholders, to say, the hard things that need to be said. And they should be doing that too, but they're not going to if leadership is not in sync and they don't feel like their leaders have their back. So that's the first thing that has to happen. So then when I say you need to have a plan, it's like, okay, we're in ad hoc mode right now. We don't have self-serve tools because we haven't had time to build self-serve tools because we're spending all our time producing data sets. Again, that's where this kind of like, you can call it a data coordinator or junior analyst or whatever you want to call it. That's where this role can really come in clutch, because it's going to free up a little bit of bandwidth on the team. Then you need, okay, here's going to be our plan. This is how our self-serve platform is going to look. Here's the tool we're going to use. Data governance is really great for this. Data catalog, Select Star is an awesome tool to use for this kind of thing, because you're helping to make the data that you have, make your assets more visible and democratized across the org. And you're letting your teams and stakeholders participate in, cataloging and documenting and, organizing really everything that you have. So that can go a long way towards self-service. You have to have a roadmap for, okay, here's how long it's going to take to build out this self-service platform. At that point, we're going to spend time training our stakeholders on this platform as we transition into a different model where stakeholders are expected to try to self-serve first, and requests to the team have to go through this process of making sure that it's high enough impact to the business to justify our team working on it, right? And at that point, that's where you're really like partnering with people, and it's not a request, it's more like a conversation where they're explaining the problem and you're helping understand how to solve it. So it has to be, you have to have a plan, and you have to have buy-in from leadership, and then you have to, like, I'm saying you as like the leader, like let's say you're the most senior data leader, it is on your shoulders to talk to the leaders of your stakeholder groups and communicate what you're doing. Hey, we're trying to become a more effective team. We want to be able to serve you and everyone else better. Here's what we're doing. Here's how long it's going to take. And during this time, you're going to see people on the team be instructed to push back a little more, to ask a few more questions, to challenge assumptions a little more. And, there's going to be times where I'm going to tell my team to say no. If it's an ask that is not a priority to the business, we're not going to be able to take it on right now. And here's why. And I need your support on this. At that point, then you can go to your team and say, okay, here's our plan. I've talked to all the leaders. Everyone's on board. Everyone has y'all's back. this is going to be uncomfortable at times because I'm going to be asking you to push back on stakeholders, which you might not be used to, but I'll be here every step of the way. I can give you language to use if you're in a situation and you don't know how to handle it. I can help, mediate if there's any conflict, like if a stakeholder is just not having it, being there to support your team through the transition. That builds trust, it builds impact in the team, and it doesn't just build trust with you and your team, it builds trust with you and leadership, right? Because they know that you have a plan and you're going to do what it takes to get there, and you're being clear about what kind of support you need. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not simple, but not easy thing
That's
to
right.
bring up to other leadership because, they have their own goals and it feels like we are slowing them down. At the same time, I think like recognizing and just showing also the facts of, this is how much time that the team is spending on answering questions, and hence we are not being able to get to really strategic projects, and this is not sustainable. I think it is an internal conversation that happens, and a lot of the times I think, especially with tool adoption, this is one of the metrics that a lot of our customers track: number of tickets per month, number of questions that get asked per month, how much of time have spent on ad hoc requests before and after the self-service tool. I think these are like areas that should be just like quantified and be discussed with other leadership as well.
Yeah, I agree. We're data professionals. We got to bring the data. We got to bring the receipts to show, the impact of what we're proposing.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any other like a metric that you see as more effective in this regard.
No, I mean, you named the one, like number of tickets, but I think the quantitative metrics are really important. But I think that qualitative metrics are just as important, especially with what we're talking about here. So, having some kind of structure or mechanism to regularly get feedback from stakeholders about what improvements they've seen. So maybe you have like a group of key stakeholders, and you have a 15-minute check-in every month or 2 month or every quarter. You're getting that regular, like, hey, how have things been going? What's been working? What's not working? This gives you the opportunity to hear those stories like, we were thinking about this product launch, and Bob on the team brought up the fact that we really need to conduct this kind of experiment first to see whether this launch would even be feasible. And so we followed his advice, and it turned out we would have wasted all kinds of time and money doing it. That's where you're going to find out about those things. You have to be proactive about getting that kind of feedback. And I honestly think that those things are even more impactful to showing leadership the value of what you're doing, because those are real stories about how a strong partnership with the data team has improved the business, kept you from making bad decisions, improved the quality of the decisions that you do make. So metrics are important, but to be honest with you, metrics can kind of be a double-edged sword, because teams that are so overwhelmed with ad hoc requests, if you're then having them also track the requests and do all of this administrative work on top of it, it's like what I've seen happen is that they just aren't going to do it because they're too overwhelmed. They're doing too much. So if you want to really diligently track those metrics, again, this junior role that I keep mentioning, this is a great use for someone like that, because they can really help out. I have also seen a lot of success with tracking those metrics if you have a project manager for your data team. So I know there's kind of mixed feelings about whether data teams need project managers. I personally am a big advocate because I've seen good project management work, and as far as metrics go, that's going to help out a lot.
Good stuff. We actually have a question from the audience, which I think will be interesting to discuss. The main question here is: in the times of significant organizational change, like new leadership or industry disruption, where different, I guess, employees and teams are affected, how could companies maintain or rebuild trust in their data culture?
I love seeing someone ask this question. I wish everyone cared as much as I do about, and I know a lot of people do, but yeah, managing teams through change is incredibly important to get right. And I would say the number one word is vulnerability, right? The leadership, not just leadership on the team, but leadership at the company, has to be willing to say the hard things. Hey, I know this is a really big change, and I know that a lot of folks are struggling with this. And I want to just take a minute to acknowledge the feelings in the room, that we're all human beings here. And, it's hard what we're going through. I'm here to support you. And here's all the ways that I'm going to provide support. I'm going to provide you updates when I have them. When I know something, you'll know it. I'm going to be really honest and transparent with everyone about the path forward. That means I'm going to have to tell y'all stuff you really don't want to hear sometimes, but I'm going to do it because I respect you and you deserve to know the truth, right? So talking to people directly as human beings is honestly the most important thing you can do managing through change. I have seen so many companies get this wrong, and it honestly baffles me because all you have to do is say the things. I don't understand. I know that there are things that have to be kept confidential, right? Like obviously we can't say all of the things all the time. Sometimes we do have to keep things secret. But I've seen companies take it to an extreme where they won't share any information. And all you're doing when you don't share information is producing a lot of anxiety. I actually pulled up some data as a data professional. Like I said, we got to bring receipts. The World Health Organization reports that depression and anxiety cost the global economy $1 trillion with a T dollars each year in lost productivity. Okay. Anxiety and depression. When people are going through big changes and they're having trouble managing that, what are the most likely experiences that they're going to have? Anxiety and depression. That's going to cost you a ton of money. So aside from the fact that we should do this for people because they're human beings and they deserve dignity and, they're worthy, we should also do it because it's a good business decision. We should communicate transparently to the extent possible anytime we can. We should always err on the side of transparency. Anytime I've led a team, I'm telling them everything I'm allowed to tell them, what I know. And if there are things I can't tell them and they ask me a question and it's something I can't tell them, then I straight up will tell them I'm not, either I don't know or it's not something that we're able to discuss yet. But I promise when I can or when I know and have the answers, I will let you know. I tend to err on the side of radical transparency, and I find that helps a lot. Why? Because when you talk to someone like an adult and you don't keep them in the dark and you're not protecting them from the truth, or you think you're trying to reduce panic, but actually all you're doing is introducing panic. When you do that, you are sending the message, I respect you as a human being and you can trust me. And we're in this together and we're going to get through this. People can smell bullshit. They can, and they know when they're being, managed, when you're trying to manage their perceptions and stuff. So I think maintaining and rebuilding trust in your data culture, it's all about vulnerability, communication, empathy, saying the things.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing. Appreciate that. Awesome. So I guess there is a lot of this empathy, transparency, communication. Now let's talk about the side of communication to call things out. And as data professionals, we are not just technical experts. We are not just providing answers and strategic guidance. There is a lot of translation of what is true and what what the representation is today that may have been different from plans and processes and the direction that the company is heading. Can you share a bit more about a time where you've seen perhaps a company's strategy not necessarily lining up with what's happening on the ground? What are some of the things that data teams, and how do the data teams observe this before business leaders may even recognize it? What are the ways that these types of differences, or I don't want to call it misalignment, but somewhat of a misalignment between strategy and what's happening on the ground, and something that will get to the right path for the company?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's something that I've seen a lot at, honestly, pretty much every company I've ever worked at has had some scenario where, the company says this is the direction we're going, but then the people on the ground are like, well, it doesn't seem like we're going in that direction because I'm seeing all this happen. So again, trust, relationships, communication. When you have those relationships, you're able to have the conversations that are going to make you aware that there's a misalignment. And honestly, awareness is really the first step to being able to get back on the same page. So, one thing that you want to do as a leader is constantly be soliciting feedback from your team. And I don't mean, do you have any feedback for me today? I mean, when you're in your one-on-one with a team, have at least one question you're asking in every single one-on-one. It doesn't have to be the same question every time, but have at least one question where you're asking about someone's experience or observations. So for me, I like to ask stuff like, so I know we're working on this and this is kind of our priority, but what are you seeing in your world? Are you seeing anything that I need to be aware of, or that you think that people don't know? What are the struggles you're having? Or, what's one thing that I'm doing that's getting in your way? Or what's one thing that's making it hard for you to do your job? This is one of my favorite questions. What's one thing that's making it hard for you to do your job? Because you're going to get all kinds of answers. And a lot of times the answers can be, well, it's really hard to do my job when I feel like I'm constantly having to context switch because I was told that this is the priority, but I keep getting redirected over here. If someone is telling you, I was told this is my priority, but I keep getting redirected over here, that is a huge signal that there's a mismatch between what the stated strategy is and what's actually happening on the ground. And you need to pay attention to that. And so if someone says that to you immediately, you want to dig in, say more about that. Tell me what that looks like for you. And then take what they say and communicate it up. So again, this goes back to consistency. Take action on the feedback you get. It's great to empathize and be like, oh my gosh, like that sounds terrible. What can I do to support you? But if you're not then taking that step to be like, man, that they really just described this huge misalignment here. I need to do something with this. Then you're not fully doing your job.
Yeah. I think there is definitely a part on, sure, could be a misalignment, but in a lot of the times, data teams and more like horizontal teams in general, they do get into a lot of, well, not a lot, but these changes in kind of priority of the tasks day to day, it just comes and these are just like fires you have to put out.
Right.
Are there ways that you see as like systematically like make this better? Because if like this is not something that you can avoid, especially in an environment of fast growing companies or startups, operationally, not everything's built like perfectly. Something's gonna break. You're gonna get pinged, and you're gonna have to look into it. Yes, your priority, and there are objects that you are working on. So I think there is definitely a part of like individual prioritization, and if they are end up spending too much time on just putting out fires and have that struggle, I totally get that. At the same time, if this is not something you can avoid, these fires are going continuously happen. From more systematic perspective or from the leader's perspective, what are the things that data leaders can do to mitigate that or to like make that, I guess, less intense and doesn't feel like, it's just the nature of being part of the team?
Yeah, great question. This is, to me, another really great selling point for getting a project manager, because a project manager, a project manager isn't going to be the one putting out the fires, but what they can do is handle communications, status updates, collecting the metrics about what caused the fire in the first place, gathering all the kind of like the metadata, right? It's like, okay, I might be the analyst who's fixing whatever the thing is, but that means that I'm buried. I don't have time to collect the contextual information, put together, like a presentation or whatever. A project manager can kind of monitor things, monitor all the different fires going on, and then put together like a picture of that. And so what that does is empower you as the leader to say, okay, so we just had, last week we had a ton of fires to put out. We had fire A, B, C, and D. And what I notice about these fires is that A, B, and C could have been prevented. And here's how we could have prevented that. So why don't we talk about how we can bake more discipline and rigor into our upstream processes so that we're not running fire drills all the time? If you don't have a project manager, again, a more junior person on the team, assign like a case manager almost, like an incident commander or something like that. Someone who's in charge of managing the fire, not necessarily being the one to fix it, but managing all the stuff, around it. And yeah, that doesn't have to be a project manager. It could be anyone on the team. The way to change minds with leadership in terms of adding new processes, revisiting whether the strategy we're saying we have is actually the strategy we have, really that's going to come down to data. Because as you've mentioned a few times, other leaders in the company, other people, our stakeholders, they're busy executing on their priorities. So they're not really stopping to think what's going on in our world and how these different things that happen impact a data team. Think about like a whip, right? Like if the CEO of the company is the handle of the whip, and every time he or she makes a decision, that whip is like getting cracked. Imagine like the rest of the whip kind of responds in time, right? The data team is at the tail end of that whip. The data team's just getting whipped around all over the place. Any tiny change in direction at the top, like they might only be moving 10 degrees, but the data team is going to feel that hugely, because think about it. The CEO says, I was in the shower this morning and I got this random idea and I think we should explore going in this direction. Go out and, like, they're telling their direct reports, go out and tell me if this is a good idea. What do you think those direct reports are doing? Are they going and writing a SQL query? No, they're not. What they're doing is they're going to their direct reports, maybe the directors, and they're saying, okay, Bill wants to focus on this. He wants to know if this is a feasible question. Then they're going to their direct reports and so on. So by the time you get down to the team, all the team knows is suddenly they have 20 people from different parts of the company DMing them about these questions coming out of nowhere. And they're told it's a high priority ask. And they're like, okay, well, this has nothing to do with what we thought the priorities were. And so when I say baking in discipline and rigor, that's kind of the situation I'm talking about. It's like, it helps if leadership has an awareness that their actions have rippling impacts that get more exponential as you kind of go down deeper into the company. That's not always the case, but baking discipline and rigor into that would mean saying, okay, well, our company has a process, we have a policy around this. When we have our stated strategy and our stated goals, we need to have a week's notice before we can divert our attention, or there needs to be a really compelling business case. And curiosity is not a really compelling business case. Curiosity can lead to really compelling business cases, but a treasure hunt or a fishing expedition is not a really compelling business case. So yeah, it's a complicated topic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially I think if it's coming from the CEO and there are multiple direct reports and they probably have their own ideas of how to get there. And hence, when it comes down to the actual person doing the analysis, this may even look like completely different asks too.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess as a data leader that sits between a lot of different departments and are aware of all these contexts, what are the ways that data leaders should create alignment and ensure within the leadership that they work with then?
Yeah, regular conversations. I think leaders, and I don't know how many companies do this. I worked at companies that do this really well, where the leaders from different verticals will have like a regular meeting cadence, either weekly or every 2 weeks or whatever, where they're touching base consistently and having conversations so that if there's changes in alignment or, there's gaps that need to be filled or whatever it is, people know right away. They can have those conversations before it turns into another fire to put out. So I think that, again, broken record, trust and relationships. When you have the basis of trust and relationships, not just with your team, but with your stakeholders and with your peer managers across the organization, these can just be conversations. Not everything has to be a PowerPoint deck and a lot of anxiety and pressure. It can literally just be slacking someone on a Monday. Maybe not Monday, be nice, do it on Tuesday or Wednesday, because Mondays are horrible for a lot of people. But slacking Bill in the morning and being like, hey, how did last week go for you? Here's something I noticed. Have you heard anything about this? Talk to the other leaders, talk to people. That's really how you're gonna find out the most stuff, and ask questions. If someone says something that piques your interest, don't just be like, like to yourself, like, I wonder what's going on there. Say, well, do you have any sense of why that is? Or, what precipitated this? Or what's that like for your team? What are the impacts? I can tell you for my team, this is gonna be a pretty big deal. Yeah, it's really just conversations. A lot of problems in an organization could be solved if people were having conversations regularly.
I agree. And also, I think through conversations, getting to the root of the problem, not just handling the symptoms of the problem.
Yes. Oh my gosh,
Um,
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. Like the 5 whys, like we all know the 5 whys exercise. Well, why did this happen? Well, why did that happen? Well, why did that happen? So you can kind of get from here's the problem we saw on the surface to, okay, that was caused by this. Well, that was caused by this other thing. And eventually you get to the kernel of truth, right? Like the root cause. And that'll help you to fix things.
yeah. And I mean, related to these meetings, what are some of, is there any approach that you can share to ensure that you are also driving the follow through after the meetings? So that the alignment is actually meaningful and is actually getting executed in a way like you are already like struggling with so many things that you have to do on your day to day. So I think some of these conversations and ideas discussed, I wonder if there are like tips that you would share with the audience regarding making sure that, a lot of things that were discussed as an idea is actually followed through as actions and areas to come back to for the team.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is where technology can actually help a lot. So I use Slack for this quite a bit. And again, I've been in remote companies mostly the last few years. And so what I'll do is if I have a conversation with someone and let's say, I've asked how things are going and they say this and this, and we come up with an action plan that they're going to do something and I'm going to do something and we're going to follow up. What I'm going to do is I will either like right after that conversation while I'm still in Slack, type up a message and say, hey, just checking in on what we talked about last week. I've done X, Y, and Z. What kind of progress have you made? And schedule it to be sent at the agreed upon time when you were going to check in. That's one thing you can do. If you're afraid that you might not get to it or whatever, another thing you can do is use Slack's remind feature where you send yourself a reminder like, hey, don't forget to check in with Bill about the thing you guys talked about last week. So I really love to utilize technology for that because 100%, I'm so busy throughout the day. If I don't write it down or do those reminders or have something automated, it is going to leave my brain and I don't want to disappoint anyone. So that's one thing you can do. A lot of times in these conversations, you're having to delegate to your team. So again, have the conversation with your team and then in Slack, schedule your reminders or schedule your message to go out. Hey, just checking on X, Y, and Z. Did you get this done? Where are you at on this? It's really important to set the expectation with your teams that if they are asked to do something and it looks at all like they even might not finish it, they should let you know right away. And the way to ensure that they will let you know right away is when they do tell you, I don't think I'm going to be able to finish this because this and this came up. Instead of getting onto them, then you can say, I really appreciate you letting me know. Thank you. Is there anything I could do to support that might help you meet that deadline? Or are we saying like, for sure, this isn't going to happen? Like build trust with the teams, make them feel safe for having told you that something was going to go wrong. And then they're going to always be proactive and give you the information that you need before it becomes an emergency.
What if they don't let you know? Because they forgot to get back to you or missed the message. Yeah, like literally they're busy too, right? So, and
Yeah.
you're like waiting for it, like,
Yeah, I mean, I again saying the thing. So this has happened to me a few times, and usually what I'll do is message some. Actually, what I like to do is like the pre-check-in check-in. So I had a conversation with Bob. We're gonna meet next Wednesday to go over, what we found. Right on Monday, I'm saying, hey, I know we're gonna meet on Wednesday. I just wanted to see if there were any last-minute questions you had, or if there was anything we needed to get back on the same page with. That's going to give them the opening to say, actually, I forgot, or actually, it's not going to get done, or I did have another question, or whatever it is. So I tend to just expect that people are usually not going to meet deadlines because that's been my experience. So I've really grown to love the pre-check-in check-in. And it doesn't have to be confrontational. You can say anything you need to say in a way that's respectful and, convivial and says, hey, like we're in this together.
wonderful. As we wrap up, I wanted to ask you our last question. What is your one behavior or advice you should tell them, you would tell them to model if a new data leader is joining a high growth company tomorrow?
Yeah, man, there's so many, but if I have to just pick one, then I think it would be vulnerability. Because at the end of the day, even if you're the leader of a team, you do need to depend on your team and your team needs to depend on you. And you want to set up that relationship for success by communicating, I'm here for you, but I'm also just a human being trying to get this right. We're all at the end of the day trying to get this right, and we're not always going to. So, opening up and making it a safe space for people to talk about what's really going on, I think goes a long way towards building trust, getting people to open up to you, finding out what the challenges are that you need to address. But a lot of times people aren't going to be vulnerable with you first. You have to take that first step as the leader.
Yeah, but also as a new leader, you want to probably, I think a lot of people do have this impression that they need to prove themselves and provide clarity, direction for everyone to follow. How would you, I guess, balance that? Like, because you picked vulnerability, right? If you're already a seasoned leader that is already built up that trust in the company, that I think is a very important element. How do you see like new leaders also kind of balancing that, and do you feel like this is still important to do that from the get go?
I do think vulnerability is really important. But like, whether you're a new leader or a seasoned leader, right? Okay, let's say you're a seasoned leader who does not have a reputation for being vulnerable. And you're like, okay, well, how do I start this now? Because people already know me this way. Like, be vulnerable and say. So here's how I would start that conversation. I'd say, y'all, I know we've worked together for a long time now, and you guys are accustomed to the way I've been doing things, but it's been coming to my attention recently that the way I'm running this team, we're not serving our stakeholders as fully as we could be. And I know that we could be doing so much better, and I want to be doing so much better. So I'm going to be making some changes, not only with we're going to make changes on the team that I'm going to involve y'all in, and we're going to talk through what those are, but you're going to be seeing me make changes to the way I'm doing things. I'm going to be asking you a lot more questions. I'm going to be sharing a lot more with you about what I'm seeing not working. And I want to invite you to do the same for me. So prepare them for the change that they're about to see and then live it.
Great point. Well, Jess, thanks so much for being here and sharing all your knowledge and tips and tricks around driving ROI through data culture. I learned a lot and really enjoyed the conversation today.
I did too. I could talk about this all day. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks so much, Jess. See you later.
Bye.